On today's video of Techrot Encore Madness, we're taking a look at all our Exalted weapons. For the pseudo-Exalted melees that are now Exalted, Korra, Gara, Atlas and Ashe, click the video in the description. For the Exalted weapons that we already had, there have not been many changes to them. More specifically, the innate stances from the melees now actually grant you mod capacity, and every Exalted has the ability to use Arcanes and equip an Excellus mod. Also, every Exalted weapon is able to equip every mod except the ones they can't actually use, like Hydraulic crosshairs on Mesa's regulators, for example. This means that we can use Blood Rush on melees, Galvanized Scope and Bladed Rounds on rifles, and many other mods that I will put in the screen right now. The trade-off is that Gladiator mods from your regular melee weapon will not count to giving you extra Blood Rush crits to your Exalted, which, if you ask me, is absolutely fine, since we can just equip Blood Rush directly onto our Exalted now. This is a change that affects all set bonuses, but let's be real. Gladiator mods were the ones that mattered the most, followed by Vigilante mods for the 3 Exalted primaries we have in the game. The Exalted weapon abilities have mostly been a niche way to play Warframe, but now they feel like actual ultimate abilities, which I'm all up for. So let's see each Exalted weapon individually, and how good they became with Techrot Encore. Starting with Valkyr, who didn't really see much change sadly. Her talents, even if they are considered fist weapons by DE, are more in line with sparring than fists. And sparring weapons have bad stances, inconsistent attacks, and really low range. Sure, her talents have 100% follow through, but so does every Exalted melee. Without a range increase or a buff to their pitiful 10% status chance, Valkyr's talents are doomed to remain more or less mediocre. They are unable to stack status reliably for a melee influence build to save them, and their Acolyte one-shot potential is now present amongst all Warframes with Exalted abilities since the rework. I don't really understand why DE is so afraid of buffing Valkyr, as he is in a very weak spot in general. Even taking the status chance from 10 to 20% would be a huge buff for her, and she would gain access to potential builds with melee influence or Archon continuity. With the stats staying the same, the range being minuscule and the stance being weak and inconsistent, there is simply way more to be desired for Valkyr. I wish a rework for her talents is on the way that changes the stance, or a complete Valkyr rework to save a Warframe with some cool intent behind the original design. On the other hand, Jade has a lot of potential for damage now from her 4th ability, Glory. Glory has good damage, an innate on-demand explosion, and is really safe to use as many enemies in the game have trouble shooting upwards. The weapon itself is hit innate, making a corrosive heat build perfectly suitable for any situation. It has good fire rate that can be heavily buffed by simple mods and arcanes, and at that point Glory can become an insane DPS weapon even up to EDA level enemies. Jade herself is an amazing support frame and is now able to do really good damage while helping her team and being very safe since there are very few enemies that can target her. The Exalted weapon that directly competes with Jade's Glory is Balefire Charger from Hildryn. On its own, Balefire Charger is slow and clunky, however the Augment Aegis Gale fixes this weapon completely. The Augment gives a 3-round burst explosion to the Balefire Charger, similarly to the Bubonic Alternate Fire, that deals extreme damage on hit. This is only available when the Aegis Storm ability is active, but with Hildryn's rework this isn't a big issue anymore. Recently, Hildryn has become able to use her abilities during Aegis Storm, which makes it sustainable for her to be on permanently. You're able to spam Pillage and shoot the Balefire Art Fire for Aegis Gale, dealing crazy damage and achieving extreme kills per minute on survival mission. This ability is a direct upgrade to Jade's Glory, but on a Warframe with much less capable overall kit. Let's look at an interesting one for me, Sevagoth's Shadow Claws. For a moment I almost forgot these existed simply because the best Sevagoth builds completely subsume Shadow as an ability. However, I wanted to entertain the idea of turning Shadow to a killing mission. I knew it's something that would never be worth it, but I just wanted to see if there was something to make Shadow more interesting. Shadow's Embrace ability combined with 100% follow through from the claws made for excellent DPS. However, Shadow himself is very squishy despite the high base armor and health. The damage from the claws is very good, but unfortunately tied Shadow, an ability within Sevagoth's kits that Sevagoth simply does not want to use. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that for some reason they don't take combo duration from Dexterity Arcanes, which, why? Just why? Titania is an interesting one. This Warframe comes with 3 Exalted weapons on Dex and Pixia, Diwara and the Razorflies. But with Razorflies unable to be modded anymore through Diwara in order to do huge damage to a single target.
Okay.
Holy shit. What the hell?
You know what time it is?
Okay.
Mojito season! Mojito season! Yeah!
Nice.
5,000 Mojito season!
We are left with 2 Exalteds. Ivara, despite the small buff of 100% follow through from D, is super lackluster, has low damage and extremely low status chance of, once again, 10%. This basically kills any type of usage from Ivara except going full strength and critting through Wrathful Advance. This is a very niche build to turn a bad weapon into a decent single target weapon, but the real highlight of this Warframe is definitely Dex and Pixia, one of the highest damage exalted weapons in the game. It was able to deal insane damage already pre-rework, and now with the addition of being able to use secondary Deadhead or secondary Enervate, it's become a super strong and reliable exalted. With a high status chance and a high base damage, there is a huge potential for a blast-based build with a plethora of status effects constantly emitting from enemies, adding some AoE and further increasing the weapon's deadliness. I want to talk about Lizzie next, Temple's exalted weapon, but to talk about Lizzie, we need to showcase a big issue currently in the game, damage over time calculations. You see, with Techrot Encore, DOT breaks with Warframes adding elemental damage to their abilities. Volt Shock Trooper and Ember's Fireball Frenzy are adding DOT to weapons correctly, however the moment an Elementalist mode is added, things break. Elementalist modes become additive to the damage given by these augments in their calculations, which severely hinders their DPS. This is completely evident by testing the DOT of a hit proc with Elementalist on a weapon with Hellfire equipped, and then doing the same test with 100% strength Ember, but without Hellfire anymore. You will see that even if Ember gives more hit damage to the weapon, somehow the DOT is lower, resulting in less total damage. This is already really weird and inconsistent and is definitely not intentional, however there are some abilities that simply do not work. Temple's Reaper's Wail, Lavos' Valence Formations, Garrus' Conductive Sphere, and Gauss' Thermal Transfer do not add any damage to the DOT of the weapon, literally zero, which means Lizzie is currently an exalted weapon that is severely nerfed due to Reaper's Wail not increasing its DOT. And it's still insanely strong. Lizzie feels like a glorified version of the Ignis, or for a lack of a better word, an Ignis Prime. It's extremely strong, has a good fire rate and has a ton of upfront damage. And knowing how broken the game currently is, it will be insane to see how strong Lizzie will be once the bugs are fixed, which I'm hoping is very soon. Please fix. Alright, look at this. I've never seen this in all my life, okay? I invite my friend, look, invite only. I invite my friend. Okay, he's coming. We want to do the Railjack mission. We want to do the finale. I click on it. Where am I? I'm not public squad. Where is it taking me? Where are we going exactly? Why the fuck am I on Kome's mission, bro? One of the most surprising upgrades to me was Dante with his Noctua. This book is mostly seen as a stat stick to the rest of Dante's abilities and is simply subsumed in favor of other abilities for the majority of his builds. However, with Techrot Encore and the ability to equip secondary Enervate, you're able to ignore any kind of crit chance and focus on Noctua's ludicrous high base damage and adding extra crit damage. With this approach and Arcane Velocity, Noctua becomes an insane killing machine for Dante to wield at any time he wishes, killing people with knowledge. Dante being as strong as he is already, having a really good exalted weapon is something that I did not expect to see. Yet making Noctua viable is something that I have been wanting to do for a while now. Something that is finally possible and quite strong in particular. It's really satisfying to use and gives great results as well. While looking to test all the exalted weapons that we have in the game, I stumbled upon Ivara, a Warframe I didn't think highly of and someone I didn't think would get a big buff through this update. Artemis' bow is very niche, slow, and doesn't deal great damage, so it should be kinda bad, right? Well, I checked the arcanes list and immediately it hit me. It's a bow. It can take longbow sharpshot. This arcane gives 300% multiplicative damage to your next shot if your shot is a headshot. Combine this with the augment concentrated arrow and an ability to keep enemies in place like Wall of Life, and you get this. Artemis' bow has suddenly become a monster. It gives a 20-meter AoE with no line of sight checks and an almost guaranteed slash proc. This is because the concentrated arrow augment gives a guaranteed impact proc which turns into slash with the internal bleeding mode. Just be careful when using Ivara with this build. It's important to first cast Artemis' bow and then go invisible with Prowl, otherwise Spectral Serration will simply not work. Let's look at our final Exalted primary, the Neutralizer from Cyte 09. It has high damage, high crit, low status, and the ability to ricochet bullets. This sniper already dealt extreme damage to the primary target, but only okay damage to the secondary targets. Now with primary deadhead available, further increasing the headshot multiplier and giving another 360% base damage to an already powerful weapon, there is strong potential for Neutralizer to one-tap a group of enemies even at 4-digit high levels. Although status chance is still low at 10%, the base damage is really strong on its own, and any gas proc that might happen from the combination of Cyte's resupply can deal enough damage to one-shot anything. Ultimately, this is a very welcome buff to an already strong Exalted weapon, and one of the more interesting ones at that. Mesa's regulators were by far the most hyped Exalted gun of the update. With their auto-aim, high crit chance and decent base damage, these were already an ability Mesa is building around on most of her builds. Any sort of buffs to this Warframe is an immediate neutron activation to a huge part of Warframe's community. However, a very important nerf happened to regulators. Equipping secondary outbursts to Mesa's secondary weapon does not grant the extra crit directly to regulators anymore, which makes this interaction completely dead. With Techrot and Encore, there are two builds that are possible with Mesa: a casual build and a max investment build. The casual build is the one I'm using in the video, which involves a corrosive heat build with secondary Enervate. The idea is that Enervate gives Mesa the orange crit loss with the removal of the outburst tech to her secondary weapons and gains more crit chance through mods since she doesn't need to mod for crit chance anymore. The max investment build, however, is much different and it's something I'm not able to replicate. This requires the newest arcane hotshot, which is limited to a minimum of 1 per week and a maximum of 3 per week at the moment. With the rank 5 hotshot, you're able to get 300% extra critical chance on Mesa's regulators, and it's simply worth it to use secondary outbursts directly on the regulators again. This, combined with Tau Topaz Stars for crit chance on heat damage, you're able to get a total of 303.75% crit chance on regulators, or in other words, guaranteed red crits. Finally, after years of dreaming, we can do red crits on Mesa, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it in another 18 weeks. Thank you, D. Wukong. I never talk about this Warframe, and there is a good reason behind it. Wukong is a Warframe I always kind of disliked, but ever since the Veilbreaker update, I have had a personal grudge against the guy, avoiding to play him like the plague. This means that my understanding on the Warframe isn't that great. However, my good friend KO, that helped me on the melee weapons video, once again helped by providing insight and footage for Wukong. Together through Discord share screen, we tried to do various builds for Iron Staff, and ultimately we saw that the best results by far came from an Influence build paired with Blast and Electric. The base damage of Iron Staff is insanely high and results on the Blast rocks absolutely destroying anything with their AoE. Rooms simply explode in one hit from this melee, and with Wukong's passive increasing status damage when procced, Iron Staff has extremely high melee influence DOTs that are incredibly hard to replicate by other melee weapons in the game. However, our last two entries pose something that Wukong's Iron Staff cannot compete with. That is range. Excalibur and Baruuk have the current best Exalted weapons in the game. They're both ridiculously strong, they pose augments that give them insane elemental damage potential, and they can abuse multiple arcanes to do insane damage. Both of them are now able to stack combo with the wave attacks of their weapons, which was a huge change, and Exalted Blade also got a special heavy attack that can be procced by Tennokai. On the other hand, Desert Wind got slightly nerfed on its crit chance, going from 50% to 35%, but that nerf is probably justified considering Blood Rust can now be equipped on them. Exalted Blade with Melee Duplicate will do a ton of base damage and elemental procs posing high single target damage, and Baruuk with his block combo and melee afflictions will do extremely high damage status procs with any DOT element. However, both of these melees benefit the most from one specific arcane that puts them over the edge, and that is Melee Influence. The waves from these abilities can proc Melee Influence, therefore any type of build that includes electricity on them can work. Whether it's pure electricity, gas electricity, blast electricity, viral electricity, you get it. All of it is good and all of it can work. It's up to you to decide which is the best, but I ultimately decided to go for pure electricity for both of them since it's the easiest one to mod. I am not a huge fan of either of these Warframes, so my judgment to go pure electricity might not be correct, and the other options might be better or simply more suited to you. For me, give it some testing to see what suits you better and decide on what you enjoy the most. Alright, that's all. I didn't include Garuda's talents simply because they only got a melee arcane adapter on them, but they are the best claw weapons in the game, so you should use them if you are playing Garuda. With that, the video comes to an end. It took a bit more than expected to make because I wanted to include and test everything, but I hope it was worth the wait, and I hope you got your answers to what you want to build for. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Well, one thing left to do.